This video is about the elements of song forms in popular music. If you look at the list of songs we'll be studying this semester, the right-hand two columns list the forms and the numbers of bars for each song. As you can see, there's a lot of standardization in this area. They fall either into an AABA form or an AA prime form. Almost all of them are 32 bars with just a few exceptions. This uniformity was generated by some basic factors. First is the time limit on songs. As we said, almost all pop songs last no more than 3 or 4 minutes, and this was true even before the recorded era, but became even more ubiquitous after records became a common medium, because for a long time 78 RPM records, which was the standard all the way up until after World War II, could only hold about 3 minutes of sound. Even afterwards, when there wasn't a technical limitation, 3 to 3.5 to 4 minutes has remained the optimum length for most popular songs. So relatively concise song forms were necessary to allow for some repetition, which was also an essential part of popular music. The other basic factor behind the 32 bar length is the well-established tendency, at least in Western music, to group melodies in 4-bar phrases. These phrases are then often further grouped into even-numbered sections. So a 32-bar form are made up of these even-numbered sections. So the two basic patterns are an AABA song form, which is an 8-bar A section, which is then repeated, followed by an 8-bar B section, which is often in a different key, followed by another repeat of the first A section. The other main form is an AA prime song form, so it's got a 16-bar A section, which repeats again for the first 8 measures or so, but then changes the last 8 measures. Let's look at an example of each of these forms. The first one is an AABA form. It's called Body and Soul. It's a famous standard from the 30s, and you can see how it looks on the page. You've got 8 measures, including a first ending, which turns you around back to the top. Then you have a second ending, which is moving you into a new key. You can see the key change there. Again, that's 8 measures long, with another key change and basically a turnaround formula back into the A section, which then repeats. And depending on the tempo, you might go through this form 4, 5, 6 times in a record. Sometimes it was a ballad, so there'd be fewer. Sometimes it was more up-tempo, so there'd be more repeats. It really depended on the creativity of the arranger and or performer that was putting out that particular version of the song. The AA prime song we're looking at here is called There Will Never Be Another You. And you can see just visually on the page, it looks much longer, right? It's not broken up into little chunks the way the AABA form is. So if you notice halfway down the page then, after 16 bars, the tune repeats and it goes along more or less the same as the beginning, in fact exactly the same as the beginning, until this point where it moves into a new melodic phrase. Okay? So this is a very common way A prime songs worked. They seem to be repeating up into a certain spot when they change the melody. Usually it's some kind of climax to the whole song. Right? So these are sort of longer spanned musical phrases without a contrasting middle section. These two forms, or some simple variation or extension of them, account for the vast majority of all popular songs in the jazz pop era. There's a few harmonic and formal practices that are necessary to make these forms work. The first important concept is the turnaround. The turnaround is a series of chords, usually 2 to 4 chords within a couple of measures, which set up the return to the beginning of the A section. The most common turnaround in the era we're going to be looking at is called the 2-5 turnaround, a 2 minor 7 and a 5 dominant 7 of whatever the first chord of the song is, which is usually, but not always, the 1 chord. The turnaround is such a universal feature of popular songs that you really can't find one in this whole time period that doesn't have that universal formula. So for an AABA song form, The turnarounds occur at these spots. End of the first A section to turn you around to the beginning of the A section. The second one is the move from the end of the B section back again to the A, and that's often the same chord progression. And then there's another one at the end to repeat the whole thing over again. So basically, anytime you're going to start the song over again, you have this little harmonic formula which sets up the arrival of the beginning of the A section. For the A prime song form, the turnaround occurs at these points. So it's really just at the end of the first 16 measures to get you to the back of the form again, and then at the end of the whole song. Publishing sheet music, space equals money. So publishers devised some symbols that would allow them to avoid writing repeated music out. The first of these is the repeat symbol. This is usually inserted at the end of an A section in an AABA form, along with the turnaround to send us back to the beginning. Of course, if there is a repeat in the form, that means that it's condensing the actual written material. That is, you're just using the same 8 measures of the A section over again. The problem is that in an AABA form, the ending of the first A has a turnaround to the beginning, whereas when we get to the end of the second time through, we need different chords to move us on to the B section rather than starting over again. In order to make everything work, publishers invented symbols for those two different kinds of endings, known as the first ending and second ending symbols. So the first time through, you use the first ending with turnaround. The second time through, you use the second ending, which moves you off to the B section. It's probably easier to see how this works in an actual song. Let's look at Bewitched from our songbook. You can see that after 6 measures, there is a first ending symbol followed by 2 measures, which is a 2-5 turnaround, and then a repeat sign. So you play all the way through those 8 measures and go back to the beginning. And then you play through the first 6 measures and are sort of diverted off into the second ending, which moves us on to the B section that starts with the D minor chord. The last thing I'll say here is that publishers are maddeningly inconsistent about all this. Sometimes they use repeats, sometimes they write it out again. Sometimes they'll write out part of it and then use a repeat symbol. It's really not standardized at all. So you just have to be prepared for any possibility. Chord symbols are the main shorthand for outlining harmonic progressions. That is, the chords are almost never written out in notation, just a melody with chord symbols above them. Symbols have 3 parts. They give you the chord root, the triad type, and then some indication of the 7th or extensions or alterations. So they all have a root, biletter, and accidental, and then other symbols for triad types and the 7th. Typical designations are a capital M and small case m for major and minor. Occasionally MAJ or MIN will be indicated. Sometimes in older sheet music, you can see a little triangle for major and a little dash for minor, sort of a shorthand. The diminished 7th is indicated by a circle and a 7, and a half diminished 7th is a slash through the circle and a 7. Many of the songs we'll be looking at this semester originated in musicals, which means that they were part of an ongoing storyline. And these songs would usually have a little introductory section that sort of transitioned you from the dialogue of characters into the coming song, right? So that section was called, unfortunately, a verse. This is confusing, of course, because in later eras, the term verse would be a main repeating part of the song, which alternates with the chorus, but that's not how they used it at this time. The verses were almost half-spoken or had a very, very simple melodic line to contrast with the real song. And the real song, they called a chorus. We would think of a chorus as just a part of a song, but for them, the thing we think of as the song was what they called the chorus. So I've included a couple of these verses along with the song for some of our pieces in the songbook. For the most part, though, we're going to be interested in just the quote-unquote actual song, which is by far the most common way that these things are performed.